Most dangerous Aryan Brotherhood gang members in ADX prison. The steel door slammed shut behind Officer Ramirez, and the whole tier went quiet. Deep inside ADX Florence, the most secure prison in America, a single inmate sat on his concrete bed, staring at the wall. His name was Ray Bonecrusher Dalton, one of the most feared Aryan Brotherhood members ever locked inside the Supermax. Everyone in the unit knew the story. They knew why the cameras on his range were doubled. They knew why officers never walked past his door alone. And they knew one more thing. A new order had just come into the prison, and Bonecrusher was at the center of it. But what was the order? Who sent it? And what was going to happen next in the most dangerous prison on Earth? That's what this story is about. The hidden power, the silent messages, and the men inside ADX who built their reputations through fear, loyalty, and violence that no one ever talked about aloud. The silent kings of ADX. ADX Florence is built to break communication. But even here, the Aryan Brotherhood, also known as the AB, found ways to speak without talking. In this chapter, we meet 3 of the most dangerous AB members ever locked inside the Supermax. Men whose names officers whispered, not because they were famous, but because one wrong move around them could spark something deadly. 1. Ray Bonecrusher Dalton. Bonecrusher wasn't the biggest inmate in ADX. He wasn't the loudest. He wasn't the one who caused chaos every day. But he was the one everyone respected. His power came from planning. He didn't act fast. He acted smart. And every time he moved, it meant something serious was coming. Even the guards said the same thing. If Bonecrusher is calm, something bad is on the way. 2. Mitchell Red Ice Warner. Locked in a nearby range was Red Ice, a man with ice blue eyes and a history that followed him like a shadow. He wasn't known for talking. He was known for doing. Red Ice had been in ADX for years after a violent incident in another prison. Officers remembered dragging him away while he stared forward without blinking, like he didn't even feel what he had done. Inside ADX, he followed every rule, but everyone understood that his silence wasn't peace. It was patience. The preacher. He earned his name because he talked like a quiet preacher. Slow voice. Soft tone. Never raised his hands or his voice. But officers said he was the most dangerous of the 3 because he knew how to make people listen. Even in a prison where you barely see another inmate, Preacher found ways to influence others. A look, a nod. A folded piece of paper slid under a door at the wrong time. He didn't need noise. He needed followers. And he had them. As the days passed, officers started noticing something strange. All 3 men, Bonecrusher, Red Ice, and the Preacher, began following a routine at the same time. Same hour. Same pattern. Same silent signals. It didn't look like much. But in ADX, nothing is random. Something was forming. A plan. A message. A move that could shake the entire prison. And on a rainy Tuesday morning, that message finally arrived. But what was inside it? Who sent it? And why were the most dangerous men in the Supermax preparing for something officers had never seen before? The message that shouldn't exist. The lights in ADX switched on at exactly 5 a.m. The hallway was silent except for the soft buzz of fluorescent bulbs. But inside cell 213, something unusual had happened. A piece of paper, a real paper note, sat under Ray Bonecrusher Dalton's door. This was impossible. ADX prisoners don't get close enough to pass anything. Every meal is delivered through a slot. Every shower is behind steel. Every movement is controlled. Yet the note was there, folded tight, pushed from the outside. Bonecrusher picked it up calmly. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look confused. It was almost like he had been waiting for it. He opened it slowly. One sentence. Written in tiny block letters. It's time. That was all it said. But in ADX, 2 words could shake an entire prison. Red Ice notices first. Down the same range, Officer Landers was doing his usual walk when he saw Red Ice standing still in his cell, staring directly at the door. Not moving. Not blinking. Just watching. Red Ice was dangerous because he acted without emotion. And that morning he looked almost eager. Landers didn't like that. When Red Ice looked interested in something, it usually meant a storm was coming. The preacher understands. In his own cell, Daniel, the preacher, Holt was kneeling on the concrete floor, whispering to himself. No one knew if he was praying or planning. He tapped his fingers on the ground 3 times. Stopped. Then tapped 2 more times. 3 plus 2. To anyone else, it looked meaningless. But in gang language, that rhythm meant one thing. Move. Somehow, without speaking, without meeting, without touching, all 3 men knew what to do next. The note had reached Bonecrusher. But the order belonged to all of them. How did the note get there? Officer Ramirez and Officer Landers argued over it. There's no way an inmate did this, Ramirez said. The doors are sealed, cameras everywhere. But that note didn't walk there by itself, Landers answered. They checked the hallway cameras. Nothing. Nobody passing by. No shadow. No hand slipping the paper under the door. Just emptiness. To officers it made no sense. But to the AB members inside ADX, it made perfect sense. Messages didn't have to come from inmates. They could come from outside. From someone visiting another unit. From a guard who didn't even know he was being used. From a mail envelope that got accidentally redirected. The Brotherhood always found a way. Bonecrusher makes his move. For the first time in months, Bonecrusher stood up from his bed and pressed his forehead gently against his small reinforced window. The outside yard, an empty concrete cage they call the dog run, was visible. He stared at it for a long time. Because whatever the message meant, whatever was coming, it was going to start there. A plan was unfolding. And only 3 men knew what was about to happen. The officers felt it. The air felt heavier. The silence felt different. And every man working in the unit could sense it. This wasn't normal. This wasn't routine. Something big was moving inside ADX Florence. And it all began with 2 words. It's time. The plan hidden in plain sight. The next morning, ADX Florence felt different. The halls were quiet, but not the normal quiet. It was the kind of silence that made officers walk faster, and prisoners sit still a little longer. Everyone could feel something in the air. And it started with the 3 most dangerous Aryan Brotherhood members in the entire Supermax. Bonecrusher's first signal. At exactly 7:14 a.m., Ray, Bonecrusher, Dalton did something he never did. He requested outdoor rec. Now, this might sound small. Just 1 hour in a concrete cage, alone, with a mesh ceiling and no direct contact with anyone. But Bonecrusher never requested anything. He followed routine. He stayed quiet. He never stood out. So when he made that request, the control room paused. Officer Landers leaned forward in his chair. Since when does he go outside? Officer Ramirez asked. Never, Landers said. That's why this is bad. They approved it, but they moved with caution. Bonecrusher stepped out, hands cuffed, shackles clinking softly. He didn't look left or right. He didn't speak. He walked straight into the rec cage and stood still. But what he did next changed everything. He looked up. For 3 full seconds. ADX prisoners rarely look up. There's nothing there but steel and sky. But that morning, Bonecrusher was checking something. Or someone. Red Ice responds without words. At 7:17 a.m., 3 minutes after Bonecrusher looked up, Red Ice approached the front of his cell. He stood completely still, facing the door. He raised his right hand. Slow. Silent. Perfectly calm. And then, he tapped the glass twice with his knuckle. Officer Landers froze. Red Ice had never tapped anything for attention. He never tried to talk. He never asked for anything. But this wasn't a call for help. It was a code. A response. A confirmation. The preacher sets the final stage. Daniel, the preacher, Holt always acted like the calm one. The thinker. The man who looked harmless until you listened to his words. At 7:21 a.m., the preacher sat down at his steel desk. He tore a line off a sheet of paper from his legal mail and placed it on the floor outside his cell door. Just one small strip. Perfectly straight. Perfectly aligned. Then he slid it forward with one finger. It was so small that a camera might ignore it. But anyone who knew AB codes understood immediately. Ready. What officers didn't know. To the guards, these moments looked like nothing. A request. A tap. A piece of paper on the ground. But inside ADX, where every tiny move meant something, these were signals. Signals forming a chain. Signals that linked 3 separate cells, 3 separate men, into one unit. Something was about to happen. A plan so carefully built that it could only survive inside a place designed to kill communication. A plan the officers would notice too late. The outside connection. While Bonecrusher stood in the yard, he caught something most people would miss. A small reflection. Just a flicker. Far above, near a maintenance camera that workers adjusted a few days earlier, a tiny glint of sunlight hit a metal surface. To anyone else? Nothing. To Bonecrusher? A sign that someone outside was watching. Someone who knew the schedule. Someone who knew the message had arrived. And that meant the AB was preparing for something bigger than the prison had seen in years. The warden feels the pressure. Inside the administrative wing, Warden Keller reviewed the morning report. 3 units. 3 unusual actions. All within minutes of each other. These guys aren't random, he muttered. They're never random. His deputy frowned. So what do you want to do? We watch, the warden said. And we prepare. Because if these 3 are signaling each other inside a Supermax, that means someone outside is helping them. He closed the file. And we haven't even seen the real move yet. The pieces were shifting. The signals were spreading. And the most dangerous Aryan Brotherhood members inside ADX were no longer waiting. They were beginning. When ADX starts breathing different. By sunrise the next day, ADX Florence felt like a pressure cooker. Officers didn't say it out loud, but they all felt the same thing. Something was moving inside the prison. Something big. Something planned. And it all circled around 3 men, Bonecrusher, Red Ice, and the Preacher. The first disruption. At 6:58 a.m., the control room noticed something strange. 2 cameras in range C flickered. Not long, just 1 second. But in ADX, 1 second is a lifetime. Officer Landers leaned forward. That camera's been stable for years, he said. Officer Ramirez frowned. Glitch? Landers shook his head. Nothing glitches in this unit. And he was right. Because in Bonecrusher's cell, that flicker was the final confirmation. He sat up slowly. His eyes opened wider than usual. He wasn't just waking up. He was waiting. The courtyard sound. At 7:05 a.m., while breakfast trays were being slid through the slots, a metallic clank echoed from outside. It wasn't loud. It wasn't long. But it didn't sound like any normal prison noise. Bonecrusher heard it. Red Ice heard it. The Preacher heard it. 3 men. 3 cells apart. All reacting at the same exact moment. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They simply listened. Because that sound was not an accident. It was a signal from outside the building. A message disguised as construction noise. Something or someone was telling them, the window is open. The Preacher makes his first real move. At 7:11 a.m., Daniel, the Preacher, Holt quietly adjusted the small mirror tied to his sink with a strip of cloth. This mirror was legal. Prisons issue them for shaving. But the Preacher didn't use it for shaving. He angled it carefully, just enough to reflect a sliver of light through the slot in his door, right onto a specific point on the opposite wall. A tiny dot of light, almost invisible. But Red Ice saw it. From his cell down the tier. He stepped forward and gave just one nod. A nod no officer would think meant anything. But to the AB? I see it. Red Ice's response. Red Ice approached his steel vent. Nothing more than a small line of holes built into the wall. He didn't touch it. He didn't press his lips to it. He simply exhaled. Slow. Steady. A soft sound vibrated through metal. Barely audible. Almost nothing. But in a Supermax where every sound echoes. It traveled. Bonecrusher heard it. The Preacher heard it. The chain was connected. The control room doesn't catch the signs. Officer Ramirez was reviewing the monitors. What's Red Ice doing? Landers asked. Standing there, Ramirez replied. Like always. You see anything weird? No. Just inmates being inmates. And that was the problem. The AB inside ADX didn't raise alarms by acting wild. They raised alarms by acting normal. At the same time, something the officers weren't trained to detect. They watched for violence. They watched for yelling. They watched for danger. But they didn't watch for coordination. The Brotherhood was communicating in a place designed to stop communication. And the staff still hadn't realized it. Bonecrusher's final check. Back inside the wreck cage, Bonecrusher slowly examined the tiny bolts holding the steel mesh above his head. He wasn't checking for escape. No one escapes ADX. He was checking alignment. Someone outside, someone who knew the yard layout, had left a mark near one of the bolts. Hard to see. Easy to miss. But Bonecrusher caught it. A faint scratch. Diagonal. Fresh. The AB called this type of mark a trigger line. Commit. Watch for movement. The next step is coming. He inhaled deeply. Then he let it out slowly. His plan was almost ready. The warden finally notices. Inside his office, Warden Keller stared at a printed report. 3 inmates acting unusual. 2 cameras flickering. Strange noise outside. Inmates requesting rec at odd times. A staff member reporting feeling watched while escorting lunch trays. The warden tapped his pen. This isn't random, he whispered. They're preparing for something. His deputy swallowed hard. What kind of something? Keller didn't answer immediately. He stared at the photos clipped to the file. Bonecrusher. The preacher. 3 men who were never supposed to connect inside this place. And yet, they were doing exactly that. We may be looking at the start of a coordinated AB move, the warden said finally. And I don't think we've seen the main part yet. The pressure in ADX grew tighter. The officers felt it. The inmates sensed it. Even the air seemed to vibrate with tension. Because whatever Bonecrusher and his brothers were planning, the real move was coming next. And once it started, nothing inside the Supermax would feel normal again. The move no one saw coming. The next 48 hours inside ADX Florence didn't feel normal. Not to the officers. Not to the inmates. Not to the administration. Something was shifting in the shadows. Not loud, not violent, but controlled, organized, deliberate. And the center of it all was still the same 3 men. Bonecrusher. The preacher. The unexpected delivery. At exactly 10:32 a.m., a food service worker rolled a cart into Range C. He was new. Nervous. Officer Landers watched him closely. Keep your hands clear. Slide the trays slow. Don't take your eyes off the slot. The worker nodded. But as he pushed the tray into Bonecrusher's cell, something tiny slipped off the bottom edge. A small speck of folded paper. Smaller than a fingernail. Cut perfectly straight. It fell on the floor without sound. The worker didn't notice. The officer didn't notice. But Bonecrusher did. The moment his tray slid inside, he calmly bent down and picked it up with 2 fingers. Another message. But this one was different. It was not a sentence. It was a drawing. A line. A small X. That was all. But Bonecrusher understood instantly. Whatever the Aryan Brotherhood was planning, this was the final blueprint. Red Ice gets his cue. In his cell, Red Ice suddenly stepped backward. Then forward. Then backward again. Officer Ramirez saw it on the camera. Why is he pacing? He asked. Landers shook his head. He doesn't pace. Ever. Red Ice wasn't pacing. He was giving a signal. Forward meant ready. Backward meant set. Doing both meant confirm receipt. He was telling Bonecrusher he was prepared for whatever was coming next. The preacher decodes the message. The preacher sat quietly at his steel desk, staring at a torn page from a Bible. He wasn't reading scripture. He was using it as a cover. Hidden in the crease of the paper was something smuggled into his legal mail weeks earlier. A microscopic piece of carbon paper. Not enough to write a full message, but enough to leave impressions. The preacher pressed it lightly against his desk and dragged it in one straight motion. The faint outline of a shape appeared. A box. A corridor. A set of doors. It was a rough map of Range C service hallway, the only hallway officers sometimes walk without cameras facing directly inside. The Brotherhood wasn't planning an escape. That was impossible. They were planning contact. A moment. A meeting. A face-to-face exchange that should never happen inside ADX Florence. Something, or someone, needed to be delivered. Officer Landers feels it first. Landers was walking the tier when he stopped near Bonecrusher's door. Something felt off. Bonecrusher wasn't sitting on his bed. He wasn't lying down. He was standing, perfectly still, right in the center of his cell, staring straight ahead at nothing. Landers tightened his grip on his keys. "You good in there?" he asked. Bonecrusher didn't answer. Didn't blink. Didn't move. Landers felt a shiver crawl up his spine. This wasn't normal. And worse, Bonecrusher wasn't trying to hide it. That meant the plan was close. Too close. The administration starts connecting dots. Warden Keller entered the control room with a stack of reports. Camera flickers. Strange sounds outside. Inmates acting in sync. New staff working unusual shifts. Mail irregularities. And now, coordinated behavior across 3 separate cells. This wasn't random anymore. "This is a staged setup," he said. "They're building toward something. These aren't isolated events." His deputy nodded. "What do you want to do?" "Lock it down," Keller said. "But not yet. If we lock down now, we might miss what they're trying to expose." "Expose?" the deputy repeated. The warden folded his arms. "People like these men don't move without a target." The hidden clock starts ticking. In his cell, Bonecrusher unfolded the tiny drawing again. A line. An X. He whispered to himself for the first time in days. 14 minutes. Red Ice quietly tapped on his sink pipe. 7 slow taps. The pause. Then one more. The preacher exhaled, closed his Bible, and sat perfectly still, hands resting flat on the desk. The entire range seemed to freeze. Something was about to happen in exactly 14 minutes. Something the prison wasn't ready for. Something that involved all 3 AB members. And someone else. Someone the officers didn't see coming. The tension was now unbearable. The prison felt like it was breathing differently, slow, heavy, warning of a storm that hadn't hit yet. And when that countdown hit 0, ADX Florence would finally learn what the Aryan Brotherhood had been planning. The countdown hits 0. The entire Supermax felt like it was holding its breath. Even the air felt heavier, like the building itself knew something was coming. In 14 minutes, Bonecrusher, Red Ice, and the preacher would move in a way no one in ADX expected. Not an escape, not violence, but something much more controlled and much more dangerous. And when the clock finally reached 0, everything began. Midnight, the sound that shouldn't exist. At precisely 11:14 a.m., a loud metallic pop echoed through Range C. Not a scream. Not a fight. Not a door. It was the sound of a service latch shifting inside the restricted maintenance hallway, a hallway inmates were never supposed to hear. Every officer on the range froze. "What was that?" Officer Ramirez shouted. Officer Landers looked at the hallway door. That came from the service corridor, but nobody's scheduled back there. The noise lasted half a second, but that half second meant the world to the 3 men listening from their cells. Bonecrusher stepped toward his window. Red Ice moved closer to his sink. The preacher lowered his head like he was praying. The move had officially begun. 0:15. The lights flicker again. The lights blinked. Twice. Just for a moment. But to Bonecrusher, that was the confirmation he needed. He whispered, "It's them." The them he referred to wasn't inmates. It was outsiders. People connected to the AB. People who had resources. People who knew how to time things down to the second. And people who were now inside a maintenance hallway no inmate should ever have access to. 0:40, Red Ice sends the trigger signal. At 40 seconds in, Red Ice pressed his palm against his vent and exhaled sharply. Not a breath. A coded burst of air that created a vibration pattern inside the metal. A vibration that traveled through the air ducts. A vibration that Bonecrusher felt immediately. A vibration that meant, "Do it." Bonecrusher nodded once. The preacher answered by tapping his desk gently. 3 taps, pause, 1 tap. The Brotherhood was in perfect sync. 1:10. The maintenance door opens. Inside the service hallway, an unauthorized panel lock clicked open. A man in gray maintenance clothes and a face mask stepped silently inside. He looked like a normal worker, but he wasn't. His uniform was clean. Too clean. His ID tag had no last name. Just a barcode. And in his gloved hand was a small sealed envelope. He didn't walk toward a machine. He didn't fix anything. He approached a control panel that managed ventilation intake for Range C. And he slid the envelope into the narrow space behind the panel cover. No inmate could ever reach that space. Only officers and maintenance workers. And yet, that envelope wasn't for staff. It was for Bonecrusher. 1:50. The preacher activates the decoy. Back in his cell, the preacher carefully dragged his mirror along his door slot, reflecting a tiny beam of light toward the far wall of the tier. The officers wouldn't see it. The cameras wouldn't detect it. But Bonecrusher would. It was a decoy signal, meant to draw attention away from the real delivery happening behind the wall. The preacher whispered softly, "Now go." 2 o'clock. Bonecrusher makes his first real move. Bonecrusher slowly sat down on his floor. This was the position he used when officers escorted meals. He looked harmless. Passive. It made the control room relax. Officer Ramirez even said, "Good. He's settled down." But Bonecrusher wasn't settling. He was aligning himself. Because the vents behind his wall had just changed airflow, something only he would notice. That meant the envelope was now inside the duct system. And in about 8 minutes, it would reach him. The AB had created a message chain through a place no one would expect. The ventilation system. 3:40. Warden Keller realizes the pattern. Inside his office, Keller studied the timeline. 3 inmates signaling. Lights flickering. Unauthorized noise. Maintenance shift changed last minute. "This isn't inmates making noise," Keller said. "This is coordination." His deputy looked uneasy. "You think they're trying to hurt someone?" The warden shook his head. "No, not yet. This is communication. And whatever message they're passing, it matters." He turned toward the screen showing Range C. "But we're already behind." 6:30. The envelope climbs the vent. Inside the duct, the envelope traveled upward through airflow. Slow. Silent. Invisible. Bonecrusher placed his hand against the wall. He closed his eyes. He counted. 6, 7, 8. The package was almost to him. 8:14. The vent drops the message. A soft plink echoed against the metal. A tiny square envelope slipped out of the vent in Bonecrusher's cell and landed behind his toilet. He didn't move at first. He waited. Listened. Then, when the guard's steps faded away, he reached down and picked it up. Inside was not paper. Not a note. Not instructions. It was a photograph. And when Bonecrusher saw the face in that photo, his expression changed for the first time in months. Not anger. Not fear. Something deeper. Recognition. And whatever he saw, it was serious enough to make the most feared AB member in ADX whisper 2 quiet words. "It begins." The photograph was the key. The reason for the planning. The purpose behind all the signals. And Bonecrusher wasn't the only one who would react. Because the face in that photo belonged to someone all 3 men knew very well. Someone connected to their past. Someone who had just become a target or a threat. What came next would change ADX forever. The face that changed everything. Bonecrusher held the photograph between his fingers like it was made of glass. His breathing slowed. His eyes narrowed. And the calm, cold mask he wore every day inside ADX Florence suddenly cracked. Just for a second. Because the face staring back at him from that tiny photo was someone he never expected to see again. Someone who wasn't supposed to be alive. Someone who wasn't supposed to be free. Someone whose name officers at ADX knew very, very well. His old enforcer, Caleb White Wolf Mercer. Who was White Wolf? Before ADX? Before the Supermax walls? Before the endless isolation? White Wolf served directly under Bonecrusher in the Aryan Brotherhood. He wasn't as strong. He wasn't as smart. But he was loyal, dangerously loyal. The type of man who followed orders without blinking. The type who would do anything the Brotherhood asked. The type who left a trail of fear in every prison he stepped into. But 10 years ago, he disappeared. Some said he flipped and went into protection. Some said he escaped death by switching states. Some said he ran. The Brotherhood had only one rule about men who ran. They never run far. And now, the AB inside ADX had proof. Bonecrusher reacts. He stared at the photo again, every detail burned into his mind. White Wolf wasn't hiding in a cell. He wasn't behind bars. He wasn't locked away. The picture showed him free, wearing civilian clothes, standing outside a gas station with a clean haircut and new tattoos. This wasn't an old photo. It was fresh, recent, taken within the last month. Meaning someone on the outside found him. Someone sent the picture to the Brotherhood. And someone wanted Bonecrusher to see it. Red Ice gets his signal. At the same moment Bonecrusher studied the picture, Red Ice stepped forward in his cell. He pressed 2 fingers to the glass and dragged them downward slowly. Officer Ramirez saw it and shrugged. Probably wiping sweat off, he said. Officer Landers shook his head. No. That's a mark. A symbol. That downward drag meant one thing in AB code. It's confirmed. Red Ice knew what the photo was about. He knew the man in the picture. And he knew what it meant for all of them. White Wolf wasn't missing. He was a traitor. And that was unforgivable. The preacher understands the mission. While the others reacted with silent anger, Daniel, the preacher, Holt responded differently. He closed his eyes, folded his hands, and whispered, "Loyalty broken is loyalty replaced." To anyone listening, it sounded like a Bible verse. But it wasn't. It was an AB command phrase. One used only when a serious job was coming. A job that required silence, planning, and absolute commitment. The type of job the Brotherhood assigns when someone must be dealt with, inside or outside prison walls. The warden notices the shift. Down in the control room, Warden Keller watched the monitors closely. He saw Bonecrusher pacing for the first time in months. He saw Red Ice's strange gesture on the glass. He saw the preacher sitting perfectly still, head down, fingers linked tightly. Keller felt a chill. "They've changed behavior again," he said. His deputy frowned. "I don't understand what they want." Keller replied quietly, "They want somebody, and they're organizing around it." The deputy swallowed. "You think it's about someone here? Another inmate?" Keller shook his head. "No, I think it's someone outside. Someone connected to their past." He didn't know how right he was. Why the photograph matters. Bonecrusher finally sat down on his bed. He pressed the photo to his knee and studied it like he was memorizing every pixel. The background, the clothes, the shadows, even the gas station number painted on the wall. Every detail mattered, because the photo wasn't just proof that White Wolf was alive. It was directions, coordinates, a location hidden inside the image. The Brotherhood wasn't just warning Bonecrusher. They were telling him, "We found him." And then something clicked in Bonecrusher's mind. Something dark, something cold, something final. This wasn't a picture of a man hiding. It was a picture of a target. The real question. Bonecrusher leaned back against his concrete wall. If White Wolf was alive, if he was free, if he was being watched, then the Brotherhood hadn't forgotten him. And they hadn't forgiven him. But the real question wasn't who the target was. It was something far more dangerous. Why did the Aryan Brotherhood need the men inside ADX Florence, the most isolated inmates in America, to know about White Wolf? What did they expect them to do from inside a place where no one can even touch another inmate? What were they preparing for? What was coming next? And why did it feel like the photograph was only the beginning? The walls of ADX Florence held their breath. Because now the story was no longer about communication, or signals, or tiny messages hidden in vents. It was about revenge, Brotherhood loyalty, and the most dangerous type of mission. A mission that involves both the outside world and the men locked in America's toughest prison. The Brotherhood's real mission. The photograph sat in Bonecrusher's hand like a burning coal. It wasn't just proof of life. It wasn't just a message. It was an assignment. White Wolf, once Bonecrusher's most loyal enforcer, had broken the code. And in the Brotherhood, breaking the code didn't just make you a target. It made you everyone's target. Even men locked alone inside ADX Florence were expected to respond. And now, Bonecrusher, Red Ice, and the Preacher understood exactly what the outside world wanted from them. The unspoken order. The Aryan Brotherhood never needed to write down their most serious commands. They used symbols, images, colors. And the photograph was more than just a picture. Inside one corner, barely visible unless you looked closely, was a faint red circle drawn around a sign behind White Wolf. The sign read, Mile 72. A location marker. A point on a highway. A clue meant only for Brotherhood eyes. But below that, something even more important. A small black triangle, drawn by hand. This symbol was one Bonecrusher hoped he'd never see again. Because a black triangle in AB code meant sanction. Green light. No turning back. White Wolf wasn't just being watched. He had been sentenced. Why send the photo to ADX? ADX Florence is a place meant to cut inmates off from the world. Total isolation. No contact. No influence. So why would the outside Brotherhood send this mission to the inside? The answer was simple and terrifying. Because no one inside ADX had anything to lose. Bonecrusher was serving life. Red Ice was serving life. The Preacher was serving multiple life sentences. These were men who didn't fear consequences. Men who followed orders even when they couldn't carry them out personally. Men who could still influence the outside without ever leaving their cells. And all three understood what they had to do next. They needed to activate someone outside. A soldier. A prospect. A volunteer. Someone who would carry out the sanction on White Wolf. Red Ice begins the chain. Red Ice walked to the back corner of his cell where the air vent was. He tapped it softly. A small rhythm. 3 taps. Fuzz. 2 taps. Fuzz. 3 taps. This wasn't just code. This was the start of a communication chain that stretched far beyond ADX walls. The taps traveled through the vents, down the ducts, into the lower maintenance level, where a sympathetic worker, a man nobody suspected, knew exactly what to listen for. He didn't know the meaning. He only knew the rule. When the taps come, alert the contact. And he would. The Preacher prepares the message. The Preacher wasn't tapping vents. He was working on something far more precise. He plucked a loose thread from his mattress, thin, almost invisible. Then he wrapped it twice around the tiny piece of carbon paper he'd hidden. He pressed it onto the corner of his legal mail envelope. Carbon paper leaves impressions when pressed against other paper. With slow, careful movements, the Preacher wrote 3 letters. 72X. That was all he needed. Anyone inside the Brotherhood would know what it meant. He folded the envelope, closed it, and slid it under his door during the next mail pickup. To the mail room, it was empty. To the AB, it carried a silent order. Bonecrusher sets the final wheel in motion. While Red Ice tapped the vents and the Preacher prepared the coded mail, Bonecrusher made his move. He walked to the tiny metal slot in his door, the one used only for handcuffs. He placed the photograph of White Wolf into the opening. Not to pass it out. Just to let the security camera see it. Officer Landers spotted it on the monitor. "Is that a picture?" he muttered. Officer Ramirez zoomed the camera. Who gave him that? They had no idea. But Bonecrusher wasn't flashing it to get in trouble. He was flashing it so one specific person in the control room would see it. An officer who had been secretly smuggling messages for the Brotherhood for years, without even knowing the full meaning. All he ever did was pass along what he was told. And now Bonecrusher was telling him, deliver this image to the contact. The officer wouldn't question it. He never did. And just like that, the AB mission moved from inside ADX to the outside world. Warden Keller notices too late. In his office, Keller got the alert. Inmate in range C has unauthorized photo. He rushed to the monitor. His heart dropped when he saw the face. "That's a civilian," he whispered. The deputy leaned closer. "Is that someone they know?" Keller didn't answer at first. Then he spoke slowly. "This isn't an escape plan. This is a hunt." The deputy swallowed hard. "So what do we do?" Keller's jaw tightened. "We figure out who that man is before someone else does." What the photograph really meant. For Bonecrusher, the mission was now active. For Red Ice, the code was sent. For the preacher, the order was delivered. The Brotherhood outside ADX had everything they needed: a target, a location, and approval from their most feared members inside the Supermax. White Wolf's time was running out, and the next chapter wouldn't take place inside ADX. It would take place out there, in the free world, where the Brotherhood's reach was even more dangerous. The hunt begins outside ADX. When the order left ADX Florence, it didn't move like normal communication. There were no phone calls, no letters, no obvious signals. Instead, the Brotherhood's message moved through quiet people. People who looked normal. People who never appeared on any prison gang list, but who were loyal in ways outsiders would never understand. Their job wasn't to act violently. Their job was to carry messages. And within 12 hours, that message reached the first man on the outside. A man the Brotherhood called the courier. The courier receives the signal. Miles away in a small Colorado town, a mechanic's phone vibrated at exactly 2:16 a.m. Not a call. Not a text. Just a single blank notification. He didn't need words. He didn't need details. He simply walked into his garage, grabbed a small black flip phone from an old toolbox, powered it on, and stared at the screen. One message appeared. 72X. He exhaled slowly. "A sanction," he whispered. "Someone's been greenlit." He didn't know the full name. He didn't know what White Wolf had done. He didn't care. His job was to pass the message to the next man. Within minutes, the chain began. Who were the outside soldiers? The Aryan Brotherhood outside prison didn't operate like a big group in one place. They were scattered across different states: Colorado, Texas, Tennessee, Oklahoma, and parts of the Midwest. Each small group had one job: listen. Don't ask questions. Follow orders coming from the top. And inside ADX, Bonecrusher, Red Ice, and the preacher were the top. Even locked behind steel, their influence carried farther than any officer realized. Their words could move men. Their orders could change lives. And this time, their message was simple. White Wolf had broken the code. And the code had to be restored. Meanwhile, back in ADX, Warden Keller wasn't sleeping. He sat inside the control room staring at the photo they confiscated from Bonecrusher's cell. "Who is this man?" he asked the intelligence officer. "We're running his face through databases now." The deputy pointed at the background. "That gas station, should we track it down?" Keller answered instantly. "Just do it. And do it fast. Because if this man is connected to them, he might already be in danger." He didn't know how right he was. The first outside operative moves. In another state, a man in a denim jacket stepped inside a dusty storage shed. He opened a crate marked with a faded number. 72. Inside the crate were an old prepaid phone, a hard drive with encrypted contacts, a folded map, and a burner vehicle key. This was a safe kit used only for high-priority AB missions. The man flipped open the phone. A new message appeared immediately. X. Meaning, target approved. Move. He didn't smile. He didn't rush. He simply nodded and walked toward a rusted pickup truck parked outside. The engine turned over with a low growl. He pulled onto the highway. Destination: Mile 72. White Wolf has no idea. While all of this was happening, Caleb White Wolf Mercer had no idea he was being hunted. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't looking over his shoulder. He lived a quiet life now. Worked nights at a warehouse. Rented a small apartment near an abandoned highway exit. Kept mostly to himself. For the past 10 years, he thought he outran the Brotherhood. He thought distance kept him safe. He thought silence erased his past. He thought the AB had forgotten. But they hadn't. And now the most dangerous men inside ADX had confirmed his fate. Back in ADX, the preacher looks ready. Inside his cell, Daniel, the preacher, Holt sat perfectly still, hands folded, eyes closed. He whispered just one line. "It has begun." Bonecrusher looked at the wall with no emotion. Red Ice tightened his fists quietly. None of them needed updates. None of them needed news. They knew the Brotherhood's machine was already moving. And once the gears started turning, they didn't stop. Even the officers sensed something had shifted. Officer Landers whispered, "These guys aren't calm. They're waiting." "Waiting for what?" Officer Ramirez asked. Landers didn't have an answer. Warden Keller makes a critical discovery. After hours of searching, the analysts finally matched the photograph's background. "Sir, we found the gas station." Keller leaned forward. "Where is it?" "Just off Highway 47. Right near the route that leads to mile marker 72, Keller finished. He slammed his fist on the desk. "They're using symbols. They're guiding someone on the outside." His deputy panicked. "So what do we do?" Keller took a deep breath. "We get in front of it. Because if we don't..." He stared at the photograph again. "Someone's going to die." The hunt is now official. The Brotherhood had activated its outside network. A target had been marked, and men loyal to Bonecrusher were already moving across state lines. The photograph was no longer just evidence. It was a fuse, and that fuse was burning fast. Inside ADX, the three most dangerous AB members sat quietly, waiting for updates they knew would come. Outside ADX, the first operative closed in on White Wolf's town. And in the next chapter, the hunt will reach his doorstep. When the past knocks on your door. White Wolf arrived home late, just after midnight. The night was quiet, so nothing unusual. But two things were wrong, things so small he didn't notice. His mailbox flag was down when he hadn't checked it. And across the street, a pickup truck sat with its engine off, but still warm. Inside the truck, the Brotherhood's operative watched him step into the apartment. No anger. No excitement. Just duty. White Wolf unlocked his door, dropped his keys on the counter, opened the fridge. His life looked normal. He had no idea that the most feared gang in America had finally caught up to him. And he had no idea who gave the order. Because even though Bonecrusher and the others were locked away in ADX Florence, their reach had just reached his front step. The final move, inside ADX Florence. Back inside the Supermax, all three men reacted at the same time. Bonecrusher leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes. Red Ice exhaled slowly, like he was preparing for impact. The preacher folded his hands and whispered a single quiet line. "It is done." They didn't need a phone call. They didn't need a message. The Brotherhood had its own way of telling its leaders that the mission was finished. It was a feeling, a shift, an instinct built over years of violence and survival. And when that moment came, they all knew the hunt had reached its end. Warden Keller finds the truth too late. In the control room, the warden received a new report. "Sir, local authorities found a man injured near Highway 47. We think it's the guy in the photo." Keller closed his eyes for a moment. He knew it. He saw all the signs. And yet there was nothing he could do to stop a message that moved faster than any prison could track. "This wasn't just gang communication," he said quietly. "This was coordination, across steel doors, across states, across walls designed to stop everything." His deputy whispered, "What do we do now?" Keller stared at the screen showing Bonecrusher in his cell, calm, quiet, still. "We prepare," he said, "because if they can do this from inside ADX." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Tying everything together, ADX Florence is built to break men. Break communication. Break influence. Break loyalty. But what this story shows is something far more dangerous. You can trap a man behind concrete. You can lock him behind steel. You can bury him in isolation. But you cannot cage the influence he built before those doors closed. Inside the most secure prison in America, 3 Aryan Brotherhood members coordinated a message powerful enough to travel across states. Using nothing but silent signals, tiny movements, vents, lights, and people no one ever suspected. They didn't escape. They didn't riot. They didn't shout. They planned. They waited. And they acted. Their power didn't come from violence inside ADX. Their power came from loyalty outside ADX. A loyalty White Wolf thought he left behind. A loyalty that found him anyway. Because in the world of the Aryan Brotherhood, and inside prisons like ADX Florence, the walls may trap your body. But they can't trap your past. And when that past comes knocking, it never knocks twice.